Yeah. Hi, welcome to our business stats group project where we are going to be investigating the correlation between total score of students throughout years 8 and 9 in Timor-Leste.
All right, so the first slide, understanding high school students' performance with NAPLAN testing in Timor-Leste. As you can see here, the sample is fairly symmetric, although there are some slight takeaways we can take from this data set. First of all, females tend to perform worse on the NAPLAN testing. As you can see, more females scored a score of 5 than males did. If you move over to the other side of the sample set, you can see that males tend to perform better. As you can see, in 0.66% of males scored 14, whereas no females did. Although an abnormality of this is for scores 13 and 10, where females did perform better. Although the general trend is that females tend to perform worse compared to males.
The correlation between age and total score is not very strong, as can be seen with the 20-year-olds who have very high scores initially, but then tend to die off in the higher score regions. But the people who are a lot younger tend to follow the exact same trend line, which is that they peak at around 5.5. Yeah.
Ready? For municipality, the general trend is that people living in Dili perform better compared to people living outside of Dili. As you can see, the percentage of people in Dili perform higher at scores 6, 7, 10, and 14. Especially at 14, you can see that 1.8% of people inside of Dili got 14, whereas only 0.16 scored 14 outside of Dili. That's a vast contrast. And also you can see on the left side of the curve that people outside of Dili tend to perform worse. As you can see, for a score of 4, 11.4% of students got a score of 4 outside of Dili, whereas inside of Dili it's only 7%. So a far less amount.
The correlation between school and total score is pretty similar between the Catholic and public schools. Public schools have a very strong peak at 6, while Catholic schools' peak is at 7. This shows that Catholic schools have a lot higher of an average score than public schools. A few outliers are in the 11 region at 11 and 14, where public schools are the only people to have a score of 14. That's pretty much it.
So for grade, as you can see, there's a clear trend here that people in grade 9 tend to do better. As you can see on the right-hand side of the curve, the majority of grade 9 students outperformed students in grade 8. As you can see, at a score of 8, 14.9% of students in grade 9 got a score of 8, whereas only 12% got a score of 8 in grade 8. So this is also backed on the left side of the curve. You can see that students in grade 8, more students got a lower score compared to students in grade 9.
There is not much of a correlation between math ability and total score, as you can be seen at the 11 mark, where people who have a lower math ability are getting a higher result, almost double the result of people who are average. And this can also be seen at 12, where no one in the high math ability category is getting any scores of 12, while people are getting scores of 12 in the average and low math ability, which does not support the correlation between math ability and higher grades.
Yeah. For mothers' education, this represents the scores students got based on whether their mother attended primary school or not, whether they went to secondary school or post-secondary school. The trend here is that generally students who had a parent that attended post-secondary school compared to no school at all tended to perform better on NAPLAN results, I guess since they were brought up in a household that emphasised education. This is seen evident with students who scored 12, 1.9% of students who scored 12 with a post-secondary, with a mother who had post-secondary education. That heavily outweighs compared to students who had a mother, who didn't go to primary school or had no education, as they only had 0.73% of students. And this is very similar to father education. As you can see, I'll go to 13 here of students who scored 13. You can see that students who had a father did post-secondary education, 1.1% of those students scored 13, whereas no students who had a father that had primary or no secondary education scored 13, which also, going back to the reasoning behind this, is that students who have a parent that have completed more education tend to perform better on their NAPLAN results. If I can, we're zooming through.
The linear regression model is used to try and estimate the gradient of the line and to try and estimate specific scores for each variable. And for the intercept of 4.83, that means that the average score, given not really many variables, just given all the variables there, that average score is 4.83 inside DILI. And I mean, just in general in Timor-Leste, but outside DILI, the correlation is 0.29, which shows that outside DILI, people are generally getting worse results than inside DILI. And there's also a negative correlation between the average math ability in the high and average section, which demonstrates that people who are higher are getting a lot higher results on average than people who are in the average category. And also gender, since males were a 0 and females were a 1 in the dummy variable, that means that the negative correlation shows that it is tending more towards the males in the higher score regions of inside Timor-Leste. Also, the T-stat shows the standard deviation. So it shows how much it deviates from the gradient of the line, really. So this pretty much just shows that for some of these variables here, such as, say, father's education and compared to the mother's education, there is a lot more difference in the father, a lot less difference in the father's education between variables than in the mother's education between the no and primary and the secondary regions for both of them. Yep. The predictions we gathered from the model for a 15-year-old girl in year 9 attending a Catholic school inside DILI with her parents who both finished secondary school had a predicted score of 6.454. And this calculation was done by gathering the coefficients and timing them by the dummy variables that we chose for each of the variables, and also by adding the intercept. So that shows that 15-year-old girls in year 9 attending a Catholic school inside DILI with parents who finished secondary school have generally a higher average score than the average of Timor-Leste. And also for the predictions we found from the model is that a 17-year-old boy in year 8 attending a public school outside of DILI with parents who both only finished primary school or no school at all had a lower score, who had a score near the average, which shows that the 17-year-old boy, although he is older than the 15-year-old girl, the other variables in his life, such as him being still in year 8 at 17 years old and attending a public school outside of DILI with parents who potentially may not have finished primary school, has a lower, just has a lot lower of a score than the girl. And this was also calculated the exact same way as the girl was calculated.
So if we take these results from Timor-Leste and compare them to those in Australia, we can see there is a vast difference in the spread of data here. As you can see with Timor-Leste, it's quite symmetric in the curve, although as you go to the Australian in the graph, the Australian students definitely had a bit more of a negatively skewed data set, with a majority of students scoring higher than those in Timor-Leste. As you can see, for a score of 6 in Timor-Leste, that was the average. So majority of students scored 6, whereas for Australian students, the average was, the most common score was 15. So this can be put down to the ability to receive education, go to school, can also be determined by family income, whether the parents can send them to school, and yeah.
Exploring the poverty rates in Timor-Leste. So it's pretty unfortunate, but 98.5% of Timor-Leste locals live below the poverty line, which is a lot lower than one would expect to find. It's also pretty bad that $25,000 to $30,000 is the average income of a Timor-Lestean, which is a lot lower than most average incomes for the rest of Australia. Testing the poverty hypothesis. The null hypothesis is that the poverty rate throughout Australia is 42%. Now, our alternate hypothesis is that poverty rate has gone down, so that the H1 is lower than 42%. So the p-value that was calculated through our testing was 8.57 times 10 to the negative 6, which is far below the significant level of 0.05. Therefore, we reject the null hypothesis, meaning this is not an accurate sample. This is probably due to the fact that the minimum income is not taken into consideration, as people may not be able to send their kids to school. And also, the sample only covers families who have children. Some households with no children may have high incomes. And it is just not a good indicator of the we just have to reject it, as it's not a good indicator of the poverty rate across the country, just in Timor-Leste.
That's all for today. So thank you very much for listening, and cheers.